Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Everything Educator Related. I just want to say thank you to everyone who has been watching my videos. Thank you for subscribing as well. If you have not yet, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Today we'll be talking about Competency 3, which is the final review that I will be doing. If you have not yet, please go ahead and check out Competency 1 and 2 review. If you are taking the FTCE GK reading exam soon, it only makes sense to watch all three competencies because you will be tested on all three competencies. So if you know you're taking the exam soon, please check out those three previous videos. It is Competency 1. I also have Competency 2 part 1 and 2, and this will be Competency 3. So if you have not yet, please go ahead once again, check out those videos and subscribe to this channel. So let's get into the video. So we will start off with the competencies. So as I said, it is Competency 3, and Competency 3 has 4 sub-competencies. Evaluate and relate content presented in diverse formats. And then you have evaluate specific claims in text based on relevancy, sufficiency, and validity or reasoning. You have synthesized information from a range of texts to develop a coherent explanation of a process, phenomenon, concept, or theme. Analyze multiple texts to differentiate approaches authors take to develop similar themes. Example, mode, author's craft, genre, and point of view. Now, competencies are basically what they will be testing you on. So I went ahead and I broke down each sub-competency for you so that you can have an idea of what is needed of you to know or what is needed of you to understand. So we're going to go over the first competency now, which says sub-competencies, which said evaluate and relate content presented in diverse formats. Now let's break this down. What does it mean to evaluate and relate content presented in diverse formats? Clearly, evaluate means to make judgments about information based off your prior knowledge and experience, cultural values, and purpose for reading. So, in other words, you are coming up with your opinion on whether what you read is accurate. So, that's what evaluating means. So, you are evaluating, meaning you're making judgments and you're coming up with your own opinion of whether or not what you're reading is accurate. Because remember, the job of the author is to have you read whatever they wrote. So in the FTCE GK reading exam, you have different passages. So you want to understand what each of those passages is saying to you, right? So the first competency is they want you to make judgments and come up with your own opinion on whether what you read is accurate, and you're also relating it to So for example, what this means when I say by relate means you're making or showing a connection between. So you are making judgments of the passages and you are making connections between the passages. Specifically, if you are doing a passage that has two sections, the paired passages, in other words. So the passages that has passage 1, so it's one passage but it has like 2 parts, if you get what I'm saying. It's a paired passage. So it's a 50-50 chance that you see those type of passages on the exam, by the way. So you are supposed to, if you are preparing, I would suggest practicing paired passages because usually those passages have a connection between them. So they're going to ask you questions based off both passages and how to compare, like they're going to ask you to compare them, compare certain aspects and contrast certain aspects of both passages or both parts of that one passage. So part 1 and part 2, in other words. So once again, what they mean by this is you are evaluating and you're relating content, meaning you are making judgments and you are making a connection between the content that you are reading, right? So why is it important to make connections? So when you make connections to what you read, it helps you to make sense of what you're reading, and you retain the information better and engage more with the text itself, which makes it easier for you because once you engage with the passage, once you're reading the passage and you're making judgments and you're making a connection with that passage, you are more likely to understand what the passage is saying, which makes it more likely for you to answer the questions correctly. So that is why this is important. So you might ask yourself, how do I connect to the passages that I'm reading? So there are basically three strategies under this. So you have text to text, you have text to self, and text to world. So an example of text to text would be, this is different from other books because, this is the same as other books because. So if you are reading two passages with if you're reading one passages that has two parts, you're saying, this passage is different from that passage in that way. So that passage A is different from passage B, or similar to passage B in this way. So you are able to figure out or make a connection between two texts. So remember, that takes place with the paired passage. And I'll be showing you examples of paired passage as I go along into this video. Text to self. Text to self means it reminds you of your own life. So for example, I can relate to this character because you understand text to self, you make a comparison or you relate it to yourself and what you have been through, your experiences, and you're able to relate to the character in the passage. And then you have text to world, which means this reminds me of da 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 in history. This is similar or different to da 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 that's happening in the news. So you're making connection to the text that you're reading and what's going on in the world. So we're going to dive a little deeper so you can understand. I found three resources that we can, dive deeper into what text to text is, what text to self and text to world is. So this is the learning at the primary pond. I found this article. I just wanted to point out the examples that they have. So there are three different types of connections. You have text to self. If you ever been in the middle of a read aloud and a student interrupts, I like pizza too. After reading something you've read, they were most likely actually making a text to self connection. A text to self connection is one where students are reminded of personal experiences when reading a book or passage. So, for example, while reading a book about animals, a student says, I saw a giraffe this weekend when I went to the zoo too. Text to text, exactly as it sounds, you're making connection between two different texts, right? So you might notice the similarities between topics, authors, events in the plot, or characters. So for example, while reading a poem about falling leaves, a student said, this makes me think of the book we read about the changing seasons. So it helps to facilitate development of this skill. Text to world is thinking of real events or social issues as they are reading a text. So students might have learned about topics from technology such as the TV or computer, or from hearing it from others people discussion. So for example, while reading a story about a family struggling to make ends meet, a student says, oh, the news this morning, I also saw a family who was needing some things. They were asking for donations because the family had a fire. Yeah. So yeah, this just breaks it down a little more. I really like the other resource better. So, in other words, it is important to consider these three connections when reading a passage because it helps you to understand deeper what the passage is saying when you can relate either it's text to text, either it's text to world or text to self. It doesn't matter. So it just really just helps you to understand or make a connection to whatever you are reading. Now, I said I was going to show you what a paired passage would look like. I found this website and it had a pair passage on it. As you can see here, it has passage 1 and passage 2. So that was what I was referring to. So it says here, this has to do with the SAT, but it still has similarities with the GKE. Whenever you're studying for the GKE exam, you can take some SAT practice because it's still reading comprehension and it's still reading passages at the end of the day. So they do have some similarity. So when given paired passages, you may be asked to answer questions like these. What is the common topic of the two passages? How do the two passages differ in attitude or tone? How do the passages differ in emphasis? Are there any important points of disagreement? So, for example, this is how a paired passage would look. It has passage 1 and it has passage 2, but it is still talking about they have some type of similarity. So, for example, the study of life on Earth ultimately involves the study of the molecules of which living organisms are composed. How does photosynthesis convert the energy of sunlight into the energy of sugar molecules? What is the structure of the cell membrane and how does it function in controlling the movement of materials in and out of the cell? So this is talking about the study of life on Earth, how it involves the study of molecules of living organisms. And it goes ahead to talk about photosynthesis, how it converts sunlight into energy for sugar molecules, which is structure of the cell membrane. No, sorry, what is the structure of the cell membrane and how does it function um, in controlling the movement of materials in and out of cell? How do muscles contract? What causes cancer? To understand the answer to these questions, you must first learn about energy and matter, the properties of atoms, and how atoms interact with one another to form molecules. So this is just an introduction, and it says you must first learn about energy and matter, the properties of atoms, and how atoms interact with one another. So it seems like they are going to talk about this. So let's see. So we're going to passage 2 now. So passage 2 says the idea that photosynthesis is essential to life has long been fundamental to our understanding of Earth biosystems. If the sun were to go out, we assume life would soon follow. Yet in the 1970s, scientists discovered organisms thriving in deep-sea hydrothermal vents far from any solar energy. These organisms rely on bacteria that harvest energy not from light but from chemical bonds in sulfides and other molecules in a process called chemosynthesis. Other more complex organisms then incorporate living bacteria into their tissues. Such relationships mirror the myriad complex relationships we see in the photosynthetic food chain in which bacteria are incorporated into organisms to provide benefits such as breaking down or synthesizing chemicals the that the organism's own tissue cannot. Okay, so we can see where the two passages relate because it is talking about molecules, right? So this one it talks about it's both of them talks about photosynthesis, and this one talks about it's basically leads to understand the um, properties of atoms and how atoms react with each other to form molecules. And then when you reach at the second passage now, it talks about photosynthesis again. It's saying it's essential to life. And then it goes ahead and talks about the organisms, how they bond. So these organisms rely on bacteria that harvest energy not from light but from chemical bonds in sulfides and other molecules. Other more complex organisms incorporate bacteria in living tissues and complex relationships we see photosynthesis, blah blah blah. So it talks in it is talking about molecules basically. So these are the type of questions you will see. Which question posed in passage 1 most directly concerns the author of passage 2? Both passages are primarily concerned with. Are they both concerned with the complexity of structures in living tissue, the origin and evolution of life on Earth, the chemical processes that sustain life, the symbiotic relationship among species? Hmm. So it mentioned the complexity of structures a lot. But anyways, I'm not here to answer the questions. I'm just here to show you what type of how a paired passage will look and how the questions, what type of questions you will see. So questions in lines 3 to 10 represent the bacteria mentioned in lines 28 are best regarded as. The author of passage 2 would most likely suggest a discussion of life on Earth in passage 1 also include mention of. So you see how they relate the sentences passage 1 with passage 2. So that's how they will ask you questions at times when it comes down to having two passages that are similar to one another. So yes, so that's what I wanted to share with you, how a paired passage would seem or look like. So next we are going to move on to competency 2. So competency 2 says evaluate specific claims in the text based on relevancy, sufficiency, and validity or reasoning, right? So you are evaluating specific claims in text um, based on relevancy, sufficiency, and validity. So remember, to evaluate means to judge, and you're judging the specific claims. So that means whatever the author mentioned in the passage, you are judging that and you're looking at the evidence that the author used to back up whatever he or she is saying in the passage. So you as the reader is looking at the evidence the author is using and evaluating whether what the author is saying is believable. So this is where the relevance, sufficiency, and validity comes in. So first you're going to ask yourself, is the purpose of the passage to inform, persuade, or, oh, I'm sorry, it should be entertain here, not inform twice. Is it supposed to be inform, persuade, or entertain? Right? So in most cases, in a persuasive passage, they're asking you, they're practically trying to get you to believe whatever they're trying to say, right? So if persuade, most of the time in an argument, an author is trying to convince the reader to accept his or her point of view. So in order to do this, the author makes claims or statements about the subject to get the reader to accept as fact, in which they back up the facts that they stated. No, I'm sorry, they back up the statements or claims that they make in the passage with evidence. So as a reader, you should ask yourself, is what the author is saying valid or well-founded and truthful? So remember we said this is where the relevancy, sufficiency, and validity comes from. You want to ask yourself, is what the author telling me in the passage making sense? Is it valid? Meaning, is it truthful? Is it not? Is it truthful, or is it just something the author made up? So that's what we mean by valid. Then you're going to ask yourself, is it relevant or connected to the claim that is being made? So whatever the author is saying to you in the passage, is it relevant or does it matches up with everything else he's saying? Like, is it necessary? So is what he's saying relevant, or is it just something random that has little or nothing to do with the subject? So for example, the paired passage, if we're talking about molecules, right? As you were seeing in the passage, comment down below what you think of that paired passage, by the way. If you had concerns or if you was confused, comment down below what you think the paired passage was saying. What do you think the paired passage was talking about? Were they talking about molecules, or what do you think? But anyways, yes. So, for example, if that passage was talking about molecules in passage one, right? It shouldn't be talking about birthday parties in passage two, if you get what I'm saying. So everything should be relevant. So you should ask yourself, is what the author saying or stating in his passages, is it relevant to whatever the subject he is talking about? And is it sufficient or adequately supporting its purpose in the argument? So if he's talking about schools should get rid of uniforms. So schools should allow students to wear casual clothes instead of uniform. Does he have enough supporting evidence? Is it sufficient, or is what he's saying adequately supporting the purpose, which is to ban uniforms from being worn? So, if you get what I'm saying. So now we're going to talk about this. So in some arguments that an author might be making, an author clearly states the position he or she is arguing from. So for example, back to that example with the uniforms, he's basically saying that students should wear casual clothes to school and not uniforms, right? So sometimes it is clear. You can see that that's what the author is saying. But sometimes it is not clear. So you as the reader must identify the argument or determine if its claim and evidence. The reader must identify the argument or determine its claim and evidence to describe it in detail. Then, after the point of view, claims and evidence are determined, the reader evaluates the argument, determine whether or not it is strong enough to be convincing. So, is it a good argument or not? So when identifying an argument, try to determine the author's position after you first read it. So is he saying that uniforms should be banned and casual clothes should be worn? Is that what he's saying? So try to determine the author's position on that. Then read the passage more closely to find out what the author's claims are and how they support author's position, right? Then the remaining text should support these claims as evidence. So whatever other information he has in the passage should support what he's saying, that uniforms should be worn that casual clothes should be worn and not uniforms. So does the argument include any claims or evidence that do not support the position? Is the evidence given enough to convince the reader that the author's claims are valid and factual, or is it more needed? And is the evidence even believable in the first place? Can the author cite sources if necessary? So you must be wondering, why do we need to know all of this? And it's just a reading exam. I know, right? But it helps. Everything, like, knowing these competencies do help because you have an idea of what type of questions they're going to ask you. So based off that I'm going to, you're going to know they're going to ask you types of evaluating questions where you have to make judgments, right? And you have to see if whether or not the passage makes sense. So you're going to have to choose the correct answer to the reading questions on whether or not the passage makes sense or not. So it's important to see what type of um it's important to know these competencies because it's going to allow you to understand, how to answer the questions for the paired passage section of things of the exam. So this is an example. So you're going to tell me whether or not if it's a good argument, right? So you can read it on your own, but I'm going to read it now. Do you grow a vegetable garden? If you don't, then you definitely should. Even if you live in an apartment, you can grow a garden on your balcony or even on a windowsill. But if you do not have one, then you know how good vegetables are that are grown without pesticides or genetic modifications. There is a great difference between vegetables you grow yourself and those that you find in grocery stores. Homegrown vegetables taste better because they do not contain GMOs. Genetically modified organisms or GMOs do not just taste bad. They are dangerous for people to eat, especially small children. They are made in laboratories using specific techniques that do not happen in nature. Some people like to defend GMOs by comparing them to plants that ancient people developed through selective breeding over the course of many centuries, like corn, carrots, and watermelon. But the work that is being done today by scientists is completely different. The most frightening thing about GMOs is that most people do not know that they are eating them. They are found in many everyday foods that we all find on grocery store shelves. Even though GMOs are very dangerous, there is no laws requiring that they be labeled. This is very wrong. People should know what goes into their food. If companies have to use GMOs in their foods, there should be laws requiring them to label these foods. This way, consumers know what they are getting and whether or not their food is dangerous and bad for them. So, clearly, you see that this person is trying to persuade the reader. He's trying to let you understand that homegrown vegetables are better, in other words. So he's even persuading you to grow your own vegetable garden. Because it says, but if you do have one, then you know how good vegetables are that are grown without pesticides or genetic modification. There's a difference between vegetables you grow yourself and those that you find in grocery store. Homegrown veggies taste better because they do not contain GMOs. And it goes ahead to back up this information by telling you more about the GMOs. So these are basically his evidence that homegrown vegetables are better, in other words. So let's see. Is it an effective argument? Actually, this is not an effective argument. For one, it is difficult to define what position the author is taking. Are they trying to convince the reader to grow a vegetable garden? In the first part of the argument, that appears to be so. However, the rest of the argument has nothing to do with vegetable gardening. The information in the first passage is relevant and should not be included in the argument. So I want to show you this. So this is a website. Whenever you have the time, please go ahead and watch these two videos, specifically analyzing the argument, part 1 and part 2.
Hi there.
Yeah, so please go ahead. If you have the chance, please go ahead and watch those two videos, as it will help you to decide whether an argument is effective or not. So the third competencies, which is synthesize information from a range of texts to develop a coherent explanation of a process, phenomenon, concept, or theme, right? So synthesizing a text is the process of pulling together background knowledge, newly learned ideas, connections, inferences, and summaries into a complete understanding of the text, right? So it's like baking a cake. When we bake a cake, we combine all of the separate ingredients. So we combine egg, flour, sugar, butter to make a new thing, which is a new cake. When we synthesize, we take what we already know and mix it in with what we have learned from reading and discussion to create new ideas and understanding, right? So, in other words, when we synthesize information, we bring together the facts from multiple sources to create an overall understanding of the material. Now, how do I recognize synthesis questions, right? So this is another resource I found, and it says here, questions will ask you to synthesize information from paired texts or passages. So for example, which choice best describes the relationship between the two passages? On which of the following points would the authors of both passages most likely agree? So these are the types of questions you will see as it relates to synthesizing, but In other words, you are basically pulling together everything you know, right? What you just learned from the passage, you're pulling together connections. You're just bringing everything together to create an understanding of the material. And once again, you will see those type of questions where it's asking you questions on both passages to compare them or something like that. So you're bringing together what you know from both passages to come up with that answer to that question. So on your own, I would like for you to watch this video on synthesizing. So whenever you get the chance, please go ahead and watch this video. I'm going to put the links in the description below.
Welcome to Synthesizing.
So I like how it breaks down stuff. For or against. Okay, so you can go ahead and do that on your own. The next resource is this. So I just wanted to point out, goes ahead and breaks down a paired passage for you. So it's examining more closely. We know that both passages deal with the issue of bird intelligence, although passage 1 mainly discusses the New Caledonian crows, while passage 2 mainly discusses ravens. Delving more deeply still, we grasp that both passages deal to have some extent with the issue of human response to and interpretation of animal signs of intelligence. Passage 1 is explicit about this, noting the first three paragraphs that that people have tendency to see animals, and passage 2 isn't as direct. So that's what I'm trying to get to you. There are some things that will be similar to both passages, and there are some things that will be different. So you have to understand what both passages are saying, and you have to be able to make connections to both passages when you're doing a paired passage. So it says the crows in passage 1 and the ravens in passage 2 shared which trait? So it says to recognize choice A as the best answer, which is they modified their behaviors in response to changes in the environment. You need to recognize that both crows described in passage 1 and ravens described in passage 2 changed their behavior due to changes in the environment. Blah, 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 blah. So you can read this on your own whenever you have the chance. Well, I wanted to allow you to see the difference or understand what I'm saying. So this is the last competency. So analyze multiple texts to differentiate approaches authors take to develop similar themes, which example mode, author's craft, genre, point of view. So I wanted to go over the vocabulary terms with you. So a fiction is any story that is the product of imagination rather than the documentation of fact. Right? A genre is a category used to classify literary works, usually by form, technique, or content such as poetry. Literary elements are the essential techniques used in literature, so like characterization, setting, plot, theme. You have literary nonfiction, which is text that includes literary elements usually associated with fiction to report on actual persons, places, or events. You have nonfiction, which is prose writing that is not fictional, meaning, and remember, fictional means imagination. Craft is an author's skill in writing a text. And you have the other definitions. You can go ahead and read them on your own, but I just wanted to introduce specifically genre, what is fiction, and what is non-fiction. So that leads us to the first topic that I want to go over under competency, sub-competency 4, which is modes. Remember in my previous video, competency 2 review, please go ahead and check those out. I talked about author's purpose, and which is the intent of or why they're writing something. Are they writing to inform, to persuade, or entertain? So remember with the vegetable garden that we read earlier, I thought he was trying to persuade, but clearly that is not effective as they said, but I'm just giving you an example. So clearly that person was trying to persuade us on something, right? You have other regular passages that just inform us, mean or explain something. So history passages, for example, they inform or explain a lot of stuff, information. And then you have entertain. So I came across this website. So the first purpose, if it's a passage to persuade, then the author is aiming to convince the reader, right? And how you can identify a persuasive passage is, students, you should ask yourself, do you feel the writer is trying to get you to believe something, right? So they they should learn to identify the various tactics or strategies used in persuasive writing, such as repetition, various types of supporting evidence, hyperbole, attacking viewpoints, forceful phrases, imagery, and photographs. To inform, meaning you wish to enlighten the reader about a real world topic. So it includes a lot of facts, and it is geared toward imparting information to the reader to educate them on a given topic, right? So many types of schools books are written with the purpose of informing. So for example, also along with textbooks, encyclopedia, recipe books, and newspapers are examples. So how you can identify a passage that is to inform is the author use a lot of facts. However, when the author's purpose is to persuade you, they will also likely provide the reader with some facts to convince them, but the main difference between the two are the way the facts are employed, right? When the intention is to inform, facts are presented only to teach you. And when it is to persuade, it is to mask their opinions amid the facts. The other one is to entertain, which when an author's chief purpose is to entertain, they keep things interesting as possible, whether it's in the form of a plot or dialogue. So an example is fiction. So remember I told you the definition of fiction, which is fairy tale, in other words, is written to entertain, especially genre fiction. For example, we find entertaining examples in science fiction, romance, and fantasy. So how do you identify this? The writer's attempt is to entertain or amuse you, right? So it's to engage your attention. They may weave a little humor in there, they may have a little thriller, they may have a little action in it. So, and then to explain, it's the same thing as inform. So when the readers write to explain, they want to tell you how to do something or how to reveal. They want to reveal how something works. So they are writing for the purpose of explaining instructions, step-by-step guides. So how do you identify this? You will find this type of writing organized into bulleted or numbered points. And then to describe, that's another purpose, which the author will use words to describe something in more detail than be conveyed in a photograph alone. So after all, they say picture paints 1,000 words, and text can help us go beyond one-dimensional appearance of things. So for examples, descriptive writing in places like short stories, novels, and other forms of fiction that is imaginative, or writing with the purpose of description in nonfiction, in product descriptions or descriptive essays. How do you identify this? The reader will notice the writer using a lot of sensory details, right? So, how they use the senses to perceive the world and to describe imaginary world. Writers may draw heavily on language that appeal to these senses. So, that's modes. So next, I'm going to do author's craft. So author's craft is more than understanding what the author is writing. It's about thinking about why the author wrote that passage the way they did. So you are analyzing the author's intention and use of elements such as literary devices. I also talked about those in my Competency 2 video. So please go ahead and check out part 1 and 2. So you are analyzing the author's intention and use of elements. So you're analyzing why the author used the literal device they did. Why are they structuring the passage like that? Why are they putting the passage in a chronological order? Why are they using personification in their passage? So you are analyzing why the author used specific things such as word choice. Why did they use that character? Why did they have that point of view? So by looking at this, you can ask yourself, is the author's intention with this text to entertain, persuade, or inform me? What idea or message is the author trying to convey to the readers? What tools and techniques are being used to the purpose and message of this text? Or is it successful or not? So this is just an example of what I mean by author's craft. So you're looking at why the author chose to use that which they did. Why are they writing the paragraphs like that? Why do they have that structure? Why are they using repeating lines? Why are they so this is just an example. So for example, they use repeating lines to make the story interesting and fun. For example, love you forever. Stephanie's ponytail. So this is just a picture I incorporated because it shows author's craft. So you're looking at why the author wrote the passage the way they did and why did they use specific details. What are they trying to get across to me? So genre. So genre is the category of writing, right? So is it mystery? Is it fantasy? Is it folk tale, which is a story often with a message? Is it historical fiction? And so that is genre, just to let you understand. Is it poetry? So it is really the category of writing. What type of writing is it? And then these are the type of reading passages. You have narrative passages in which the author tells a story. So the genre, which is the category of writing, can be fiction or non-fiction. Fiction is imaginary, as we discussed, or it can be non-fiction, which has true events. So a novel is an example of a narrative genre. You have informational passages which serve to give information on a particular subject in an objective way. So if you look at this, an informational passage would more likely the author's purpose would be to inform you, right? Because it is giving you information, right? And the passages are written from perspective of someone who is knowledgeable about the topic. So this is non-fiction genre. So I'm hoping that you guys seen how all of this comes into play. It allows you to understand the passage more and get down to the nitty-gritty of what the author is trying to convey to the reader. You also have instructional passages which teach a reader how to accomplish something. You have persuasive passages which we went over a lot of times. It argues a certain point. You have passages that analyze. These passages can examine multiple sides of the debate. You have passages that entertain. So you can go ahead and read all of this on your own also. And the last but not least is point of view. So a point of view is the perspective from which the story is told. So is it told from a first person perspective, which is when the author uses the word I and me. So first person point of view is when one character narrates the story. One character narrates the story, right? Second person point of view is when the author speaks directly to the reader, using the words you and we. Third person is when the reader is like a guest looking at the story from the outside. And this has two subtypes. You have third person omniscient. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that properly. which is when the thoughts of all the characters are open to the reader. And then you have third person limited, which is when the thoughts of only one character are written for the reader. So this should not be confused with first person, by the way, where the character is the one explaining their feelings. Because in third person limited, there's a narrator explaining the character feelings. So examples are a first person point of view would be, for example, I walked to the clothing store on Saturday. I was so happy that I walked to the clothing store because I saw my best friend. So that is an example. It uses I and me. Second person, you should walk to the store on Friday. So I'm telling you to. So for example, let's put on our thinking caps. Would that be used in a persuasive paragraph? I think so. So I'm so happy to see that all of this information is coming together, because as you can see, when you see a first person and second person in a passage, you can realize that it has a meaning behind it. So for example, as I said with the second person, if it uses you can see that the person is probably trying to get the reader to is trying to persuade the reader. So it probably is a persuasive essay. So that's how you put all of these competencies together, and that's how you are able to break down what type of passage you are reading. So the third person omniscient is, for example, remember we said that the third person is omniscient when the thoughts of all characters are open to the reader. So Mitchell wanted to walk to the store on Tuesday, but Tammy was hoping to avoid the trip to the store. And you have third person limited, which is Michelle wondered if Tammy wanted to go to the store on Tuesday. Remember, third person limited is when the thoughts of only one character are written for the reader. So it says Michelle wondered. So remember, in this one, it's talking about Michelle and Tammy. So it's telling you the thoughts of both. So Michelle wanted to go to the store on Tuesday, and Tammy was open to avoid the trip to the store. So it's telling you how both of them are thinking. Versus the third person limited, which is only tell you how one person is thinking. Michelle wondered if Tammy wanted to go to the store on Tuesday, but we do not know what Tammy is thinking. What if Tammy is wondering if Michelle cannot bother go to the store because she's not in the mood? Okay, so yes guys, so that is the end of my video, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Any thoughts? So for example, the essay that we read, if you had your own thoughts on it, please go ahead and comment down below. I really appreciate comments. Please go ahead and like it. If you have not subscribed yet, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And if you can hit the notification bell, you can know when I post something. So please go ahead and check out videos that I have on the ESE exam, and I will put those links in the descriptions. So once again, like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you have video ideas, please drop it in the comment section. See you in the next one, guys. Bye.